Hi, my name is Reese and I want to compare these two plug-in ready home battery backup solutions. This is the Delta Pro Ultra and it's obviously larger and a more expensive unit than this one over here. This one came out about 6 months before the Delta Pro 3. Now, if you're not familiar with what these are, they're large battery units that are powerful enough to run most things in your house. So I've heard someone appropriately say of these two, one is intended more as a stationary battery that can be portable, and the other is intended as a portable battery that can be stationary. Which one is better for your situation? Let's find out. Both of these units offer features that very few other power stations can offer, and one of the biggest is having a 240 volt output. Both of them have it right on the side. This allows you to easily connect a battery to your house. Now, I'm not an accountant, but I'm pretty sure that each of these would count towards the US 30% tax credit, so keep that in mind. There's a few ways that both of these can connect easily to your house's electrical system. Probably the most accessible is to have a generator inlet box connected up to a manual transfer switch. You could do that yourself or have an electrician do that. And then you would take your generator cord and plug it in either to this outlet or this one, depending on what unit you have. Take the other end and plug it into your generator inlet box. Now, of course, I had to need an adapter to make these two work, but that's one way you can do it. Another way you could do it is that both of these units have a proprietary port that's called the 5+8 port from EcoFlow, and you could get two of each of these units and plug them into this hub right here to get this 50 amp style output. Now, another way you can connect either of these up to your home's electrical system is with EcoFlow's Smart Sub Panel, the Smart Home Panel 2. And if you have the Smart Home Panel 2 and you have one of these connected, it acts as an automatic transfer switch. So when the grid goes down, it'll switch to battery power automatically. So here's an example. I've got the Delta Pro 3 natively connected to the Smart Home Panel 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the power to simulate a power outage, and I've got my LED lights coming through this yellow extension cord in this room. That's what the bright lights are, and we'll see if they flicker. We'll see how fast this switches over. That was pretty fast. Now we're running all of these loads on the Smart Home Panel 2 from the Delta Pro 3. The Delta Pro Ultra can do this too with the automatic transfer, and it's pretty cool that if there was a power outage and you had this connected, you may not even know that there was a power outage. So something I want to mention, if you see on the app here, this is for the Smart Home Panel 2, there's a little toggle switch that says EPS mode. This is what should enable the millisecond switchover. I recently upgraded the app, and I don't know if this is something they're going to address, but in my tests, I've noticed that the millisecond switchover to battery only seems to happen when the connected battery is not charging. If it's charging, the switchover takes about 5 seconds, even if you have this EPS toggle on. Now, this is not the case if you're not using the Smart Home Panel 2. If you just have it plugged directly into the wall, it will have that millisecond switchover. Now, in contrast to gas generators that you might plug into an inlet box like this, you can leave these batteries inside while they're running. They make hardly any noise. And if you have solar panels, you can recharge them at home. Now, if you don't have an inlet box or any of those other things that I mentioned, you can always just use the ports themselves in case there's a power outage. And you can even grab extension cords to run things like your fridge, lights, or if you have a well pump that is 240 volts, you can just run it right off of there. Like I'd mentioned, very few power stations have a native 240 volt output, and I'm only aware of the Delta Pro Ultra that can output 240 volts and 120 volts at the same time. The Delta Pro 3 can't do that. So I don't know if you can see, this is the 240 volt inverter, it's on, and if I go to turn on the 120, it turns that one off and turns this one on. So even though that both of these guys can output 240 volts, it's not the same power that's in wattage. So this one can only output a maximum continuous of 4,000 watts out of this port and of the port out in the back. And the Ultra can output 7,200 watts of continuous output on its AC inverter, which is almost double what the Delta Pro 3 can do. So here's a real life scenario to help illustrate the difference in power if I want to use the Delta Pro 3 as my home's backup source. See this hot water heater over here? It's running. I don't know if you can hear it. It uses about 6,000 watts of power to heat the element right there. It's going. But the Delta Pro 3, because it only has that 4,000 watt output, if I have it connected right now, it would send the inverter into overload. But the Delta Pro Ultra is able to handle it because it has that 7,200 watts of continuous output. To understand those maximums in a little bit more detail, here's a 240 volt plug. Two of these connections are the 120 volt connections. So on the Delta Pro 3, only one of these can handle about 16.6 amps, and the other one can handle 16.6 amps. And then on the Delta Pro Ultra, each one of these can be 30 amps. So what that means is that if you have this connected and one of these 120 volt legs goes over that limit, it's going to put the inverter into overload. So that difference in AC output can make quite a bit of difference. If you're trying to back up your whole house, you have to add up all the loads to make sure that the AC inverters can be able to handle it. Another thing to consider if you're going to use these to back up your house is the surge power, like an air conditioning unit, which requires a short burst of energy to get the compressor started. In the manual for the Ultra, they advise you to look at the sticker on your air conditioning unit and look for the LRA value. That stands for locked rotor amps. And if it's less than 120, the Ultra should be able to start it. Now, there isn't a corresponding one that I saw in the Delta Pro 3 manual, but if my math is correct, the LRA value would need to be 66 amps or less, because this has an 8,000 watt surge. And both of those numbers are assuming that nothing else is drawing power at the moment besides that air conditioning unit. With both of these, you can add extra batteries for storage, and they both use 90-degree cables. See this one right here to connect in the extra battery, or right here, you'd use this to connect in the battery. I don't really like those cables that stick out really far, so these 90-degree cables are nice. The Delta Pro Ultra can have up to 5 of these extra batteries for a total of 30 kilowatt hours per main unit, and the Delta Pro 3 can have 2 more batteries for a total up to about 12 kilowatt hours. With extra batteries, the Delta Pro 3 has a little bit of an edge over the Ultra, and that's because you can use the old Delta Pro extra batteries with the Delta Pro 3. And last I looked, it was about 10 cents per kilowatt hour cheaper to get the Delta Pro extra battery than the actual Delta Pro 3 extra battery. Both extra batteries are lithium iron phosphate, and I know it doesn't stack as well on top of the Delta Pro 3, but the Delta Pro extra battery does come with the wheels and the telescoping handle. So if you're in a place where you pay different electricity rates depending on the time of day, you can even use these to save some money by charging up the batteries when rates are low and using them rates are high. And obviously, if you have solar panels, that could even help accelerate those savings. Let's do some more direct comparisons, starting with inputs, particularly solar. Both units have 2 solar inputs, a high voltage and a low voltage, that you can use separately or combined. What's interesting is the low voltage maximum of 150 volts on the Delta Pro Ultra is the high voltage input on the Delta Pro 3. And the high voltage on the Delta Pro Ultra is through these MC4 connections on the side, and here you can get up to 450 volts of input. So if you use both ports at the same time on the Delta Pro Ultra, it is rated to handle up to 5,600 watts of solar input. And that's a good amount of solar. Even if you use the 450 volt maximum on the one input, that means you can string together about 10 large rigid solar panels. And that may be enough to meet most of your home's electrical needs, or at least put a dent in your electric bill. And if you use both solar ports at the same time on the Delta Pro 3, you're looking at an input value of about 2,600 watts of solar, which is about half of what the Delta Pro Ultra can input. And if you want to max out the solar on the Delta Pro 3 on the low voltage port, you may have to parallel panels so that you can stay under the 60 volt maximum limitation. But a benefit to having this low voltage input means you can use a single 100 or 200 watt solar panel with it, where that's too low of a voltage with the Delta Pro Ultra. To charge these guys up with AC power, they both come with a wall plug. This limits their input power to about 1,800 watts if it's plugged into a normal AC outlet. Another option is to get this adapter right here. This is the 5+8 port. It'll work on both of these. It'll enable you to charge from any 240 volt source, or you can get this adapter, which will enable you to charge at an EV charging station, or you can use the cable with the Smart Home Panel 2 and plug it into that. The charging rates are going to be similar to the output rates. This one can input a maximum of 4,000 watts continuous. This one's going to be a little bit different because with just one battery, its maximum input rate is around 6,500 watts. So something unique about these two is that you can input 120 volts and output 240 volts at the same time. So this one is plugged into the wall right now, and it's inputting about 1,600 watts, but it's also outputting 4,000 watts on the 240 volt output and charging the Delta Pro Ultra. And this feature is particularly important if, say, you have one of these in your RV and you're using the 240 volt output to run your RV, and you pull up to a campsite and there's only a 120 volt plug, which is probably most campsites. You could plug it in and you don't have to turn off the unit to charge up the battery first. Comparing outputs, they're pretty similar. There's some minor differences. They both have USB-C, USB-A ports. There's 2 of each. And there's 4 120 volt outlets, and there's 4 over here. Both of them have the common L1430 240 volt outlet on the sides, but the Delta Pro 3 has an extra one, this 620R port. Both units have RV ports and DC Anderson ports up to 30 amps, but something notably missing from both of these units is a 12-volt car port, you know, the old cigarette car port. So I guess if you're looking for one of those, you'll want to get an adapter from these Anderson ports. And back over to the Delta Pro 3, it has a 12-volt barrel port, which my guess is nobody uses, and has an Ethernet port to hardwire in a display. Both units have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity, but the Delta Pro Ultra has the option to add a 4G module, and that would plug in right over here. One of the input advantages that the Delta Pro 3 has is through this port. If you have one of EcoFlow's smart fuel generators, it can charge directly from the fuel generator through DC. This means you can also control the generator on-off percentages with the smartphone app. So if you want to charge the Ultra with one of the EcoFlow fuel generators, you're just going to use the normal wall AC. The Delta Pro 3 port with this adapter also allows a DC connection with the EcoFlow Wave 2 like I have here, or the EcoFlow alternator charger. Now, in terms of physical differences, the Delta Pro 3 is obviously a lot smaller, but it weighs 113 pounds, so it's not exactly small. The Delta Pro Ultra with the one battery is about 186 pounds. So this one has the telescoping handle and the wheels, so it does make it easy, fairly easy to move around on a flat surface, and you can even move it around pretty easily, I'd say, on grass. And if you have the extra cart, this is an extra purchase, this cart with the telescoping handle, it moves around fairly easy as well. But the Delta Pro Ultra normally comes with a cart like this with the low profile casters, so this can handle a lot of weight with all those batteries, and you're really not going to be using this to like move it around other than small distances on flat surfaces. So that's why I'd say out of the box this one is a much more portable compared to the Delta Pro Ultra. In terms of battery chemistry, they both have the same lithium iron phosphate, but the battery chemistry inside of the Delta Pro 3 is a little bit better, at least in terms of the cycle life. The cycle life on this guy, down to 80% of its original capacity, which is the way they rate these, is 4,000 cycles. And for the Delta Pro Ultra, those cells are rated at 3,500 cycles. The screens on both of them are a little bit different. The Delta Pro 3, I would say, has a little bit more information on the screen, if that's something you care about, like whether a battery or a gas generator is plugged into which port. In terms of how loud these are while they're running, both of these units are the quietest power stations that I've ever used. Right here I'm running the Delta Pro 3 on a continuous 1800 watt load. I've been running for about 10 minutes or so. The fans have been running and I've been sitting in here. The sound level is pretty stable. It's rated to be under 30 dBs when the load is 2000 watts or less, so 1800 watts. I do have a decibel meter, but it's basically useless because of how low the volume is there. And I'm near a door and there's crickets outside. You can see it's about 48 decibels, and if there's nothing else in this room, so I went to another room, this meter measures about 39 decibels. So it's very quiet, and the Delta Pro Ultra is even more quiet. You can watch my other videos on how quiet this guy is, even at heavy loads, but it's rated to have a 0 decibel rating for a load that's 2000 watts or less. If you're thinking about leaving these in a location for a longer period of time, a big consideration for the battery location is temperature. If they're going to be left in an environment that can get below freezing, you might want to consider the Ultra over the Delta Pro 3 because the Ultra has self-heating and it can operate down to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's -20 degrees Celsius. The Delta Pro 3 doesn't have that, so you wouldn't normally want to use it below freezing. Both units have the ability to be monitored and controlled with the smartphone app, which is really nice. If you're using these things in a more permanent way, you can see all kinds of real-time and historical data, like how much solar it imported this month or how much AC energy it used yesterday. They both work with EcoFlow's Power Insight tablet if you want to use that, and you can mount this permanently on a wall to keep an eye on things. And if you have the smart home panel too, you can do things like monitor and control individual circuits. Another thing that highlights the difference between these two in the app is that for the Delta Pro 3, you can only see input and output historical data, but on the Delta Pro Ultra, there's a third category called savings data, where you can put in your cost of electricity and see even more information about your savings over time. So my conclusion on both of these is if you're considering one for home backup, to me, there are really three big factors: AC output, capacity, and solar input. Of course, there are many others, but you want to know how much peak and continuous power you may need and how long you want it to last. And with solar, if your goal is to offset as much electricity as possible, then the Delta Pro Ultra with double the amount of solar may be a better option. Because of the high voltage input on this, you can consider connecting multiple rigid solar panels in series and permanently installing them on your roof or a ground mount. But with the 150 volt and 60 volt limits on the Delta Pro 3, it may not be worth it to permanently install them on your roof. So these are both great machines and can be used to power your home and offset electricity costs. So what would you think? Would you rather have a battery with more output power that you can't move around as easily, or more a portable-ish unit that itself has a ton of input and output power options? Let me know what you think. Post any questions or comments down below. I'll keep the video description updated with any coupons or deals that I can find on either of these units, and thank you for watching.